In June of 2022, in a town called Quintero on the coast of Chile, 115 people, most of them schoolchildren, were taken to the hospital. They'd been poisoned by the air. The air came from a furnace. It was a copper smelter owned by the Chilean state. For 59 years it had stood there on the edge of this bay, melting rock into metal. And for 59 years, the 50,000 people who lived around it had been breathing sulfur dioxide into their lungs. The town had a name for what they were. They called themselves a sacrifice zone. And after the school children collapsed in 2022, the Chilean government finally agreed with them. They closed the smelter. And then 50,000 copper workers across Chile went on strike. Not to celebrate, to demand the poisoned smelter be reopened. This is a story about why. There is a bargain underneath the modern world. The things our lives most depend on, the metals in the walls, the chemicals in the medicines, the fertilizer in the soil, are not made by the people who profit most from them. They're made by whoever will do the dirty part for the lowest price. Smelting copper is the dirty part. It means melting rock at over 2,000 degrees and releasing what comes out of it: sulfur dioxide, arsenic, lead, cadmium, the metals that aren't copper. Those byproducts have to go somewhere. Historically, somewhere has meant the lungs of the people who live near the furnace. And copper smelting itself, the actual business of turning rock into wire, barely makes money. The fee a smelter charges to do this work is one of the lowest margin numbers in industrial production. In a normal year, just enough to keep the furnace running. So the bargain is this: a town accepts the poison, a company barely makes a profit, and the rest of the world gets cheap metal. This is the deal civilization has been quietly running on, and for 30 years, only one country has been willing to keep agreeing to it. When a sacrifice zone becomes a political liability, the bargain doesn't disappear. It just looks for someone else willing to take the deal. In Guixi province in eastern China, there is a city called Guixi. You've almost certainly never heard of it. Inside it is the largest copper smelter on Earth. Around the smelter are 15 villages, about 10,000 people. They farm rice in the paddies, and they breathe the air that comes out of the stacks. Scientists have tested their soil and their hair and their urine. The samples carry copper, cadmium, arsenic and lead at levels far above what a person should ever live with. In one of the surrounding villages, the cancer rates have grown so consistent that researchers have given the place a name. They call it a cancer village. The same bargain, the same poison, a different country willing to keep saying yes. China mines only about 8% of the world's copper, but it does 48% of the world's smelting, nearly half. The rest of the world used to do this work too. For most of the 20th century, smelters ran in Montana and Arizona, in Germany and Belgium, in Japan and Australia. They poisoned their towns too. And then, slowly, those towns refused. They sued, they organized, they forced regulations through. They shut the smelters down. One by one, the West said no to the bargain. Today, there are 112 copper smelters in the world. 2 of them are in the United States. Just 2. America still mines copper. It just doesn't process it anymore. It digs the rock out of the ground, ships it across the ocean, lets someone else breathe what comes off the furnace, and then buys the finished metal back. This was not an accident. It was a decision. Many decisions, made over many decades. Each one defensible on its own. Cleaner air here, cheaper goods there, until one day the West looked up and realized it could no longer make the metal its own grid was built from. Once you stop doing the dirty work, you can't easily start again. the skills leave, the expertise leaves, the permits become impossible. A new smelter takes the better part of a decade and costs billions, and almost nobody wants one near their town. Refusing the bargain felt like progress. It was, but it was also a transfer. Smelters around the world make their money from a single fee, the charge they collect for turning concentrate into metal. It is the thin margin that keeps the lights on, pays the workers, runs the furnace. In 2025, that fee collapsed to the lowest level anyone has ever recorded. And then it did something it had never done before. It went negative. Smelters started paying the mines for the privilege of processing their rock. That is a business running at a loss to stay alive. Smelters in Europe, in Japan, in Korea, in the United States all pushed toward closure. Even China told its biggest smelters to cut output by more than 10%. When the cheapest, most dominant processor on Earth is buckling, everyone above them is already underwater. Other countries are racing to escape the trap. India built smelters and discovered it still has to import most of the rock to feed them. Indonesia is rushing to build its own and banning the export of raw concentrate, trying to force the processing to happen at home. Smelting copper requires enormous amounts of sulfuric acid. This year, China restricted its sulfuric acid exports. And analysts warn that the longer the Strait of Hormuz stays disrupted, the tighter that acid supply gets. The same choke point we walked you through in our first video, quietly tightening the screws on the metal in your walls. The bargain made the world cheap. Now the country still willing to make it has all the leverage. Not because they planned this, but because everyone else opted out. Look around the room you're in. The wiring in the walls, the pipes behind them, the motor in the refrigerator, the charger on the counter, the wires inside the laptop, the wires inside your car. If it's electric, almost 200 pounds of them. All of it is copper. More than 400 pounds of it in a typical home, and every ounce of it was made somewhere by someone in a place that agreed to the bargain. The world is going to need about 50% more of it by 2040, for electric cars, for solar farms, for AI data centers, for the energy transition we are all counting on. Which means the bargain is about to be asked of someone, on a scale it has never been asked at before. This is not yet a shortage on your shelf. Your power isn't about to go out. The bill in your hand isn't going to triple next month. What is happening right now is upstream. A slow-motion squeeze on the people who make the metal, the smelter towns, the workers, the places that have been paying for our wiring all along. But that is exactly how these stories always start, quietly, upstream, in a place no one's looking. In June of 2022, the workers of Quintero went on strike to keep their poisoned smelter open, because the alternative to being poisoned was being unemployed. They were standing inside the bargain. The same bargain the people of Guixi are standing inside right now. The same bargain that made the metal in the wall behind you. The price of cheap copper was never just on a chart. It was on a face. It always was. The question now is, whose face it will be next, and whether anyone is willing to pay what it actually costs. The metal is already in your house. It always was. The only thing left to decide is whether you ever wanted to know what it cost.